Mónica Contini es una italiana viajera infatigable. Acaba de llegar de Estados Unidos y nos va a contar su experiencia. El viaje comenzó en Los Ángeles.
Sí, sorry, but I'm going to speak English, which is easier for me. Yes, the trip was actually March, mid-March, beginning of May. And it started indeed in Los Angeles. I flew from Ibiza, Madrid, Los Angeles. And after 2 days in Los Angeles, I hired a car, a beautiful Grand Cherokee, Jeep Grand Cherokee. And I started driving east way. And my first stop was in Palm Springs, which is beautiful. It's absolutely awesome location. It's a deep valley, totally surrounded by mountains. And when I got there was actually snow-capped peaks because they had a lot of snow during the winter. And it's full of palms, hence the name, Palm Springs. And I stayed there for 2 nights, and I visited the beautiful Joshua Tree National Park. My aim for this trip, as usual, was to be in nature as much as possible. I really love the big American cities, but for me, the treasure of the States is really nature. They have amazing natural parks, and the vastness of the territory is such that you can drive for hundreds of kilometers and always see something really, really beautiful around you. And so yes, I stayed in Palm Springs for 2 nights, and I visited Joshua Tree, which was really, really beautiful. I did a lot of hikes. I love hiking, and I always take the hardest hike possible, because in that way I don't risk to meet a lot of people along the way, because I'm also a loner. I really like my own company. I don't really like to have many people around me. So the hardest the hike, the less people around. So I took this hike that took me at the very top of this mountain around the city, and the view was amazing. So I had a beautiful day there, and I had a room via Airbnb. And I stayed in a beautiful house, a typical Palm Springs house. The guy was also very interesting. He actually lived in Ibiza when he was younger, so it was a very interesting encounter. And after Palm Springs, I drove east towards Phoenix. And I arrived in Phoenix, Arizona, early afternoon, and I stayed there for 2 days. I visited the city, which wasn't very interesting. It has a small enclave, which is the old town, which is called Scottsdale, and it's kind of interesting, but a bit tacky if I have to be honest. But the main thing, the best thing I saw there was the Herd Museum. The Herd Museum is dedicated to the Indian tribes, especially Navajo, Apache, Chiricahua Apache, and the pueblos of southern Arizona and southern New Mexico. And that was really interesting and very painful as well. Because there was a section dedicated to the lost children of these Indian tribes. So basically, what the American government did between the end of the 19th century and around 1930, they basically kidnapped as many as they could Indian children from their families, and they transported them like living cattle to boarding schools, which were more like a lager more than a boarding school. The images were atrocious. What I saw in this section of the museum is unforgettable. and it's something that I wasn't absolutely aware of. I know that something like this was done in other places in the world, but didn't know about this. So after Phoenix, I went south. I went to Tucson, still in Arizona, where I visited the Saguaro National Park, and it was again a beautiful day that I spent, and again the hardest hike I could take, I took. And Tucson itself is very small and really not happening, but again it has a small old part, colonial part, which was quite interesting. And but the highlight was the Saguaro National Park. From there I drove more south towards the Chiricahua National Park, and Chiricahua is not very visited, so there were only a bunch of people there in the campsite. I camped there, and it was really beautiful. And the park is famous because it has very strange rock formations. A lot of pinnacles, a lot of woods, a lot of very balancing rocks, and again a lot of trails that one can take there. So I hiked all day long, and then I went back to my tent, and I spent a beautiful night under the stars, and I really loved it. And the day after, it was a very long drive. I drove about 400, 500 kilometers to reach Las Cruces, which is in New Mexico. And at that moment, I was already in New Mexico, but the very south of the states, almost at the border with Mexico. And so the drive was amazing. There wasn't a moment where I got bored, or I felt like, oh, I can't wait to arrive, because it was so beautiful what I had in front of me, left, right. I didn't really know where to look at. It was absolutely stunning. And in Las Cruces, I stopped there for the night because I arrived quite late in the afternoon. I visited the old town. And then the day after, it was another highlight of my trip. I visited this absolutely out of this world park. It's called the White Sands National Park, and basically you enter a big, huge territory where it's all white, and it's not sand, and it looks like snow. It's actually siliceous. It's like
it looks like a desert.
It is a desert, but it's totally white. So you have white and the blue sky, and a lot of campers and a lot of people there, because it was a Sunday, so they go there for picnicking, and the boys and the kids are sliding down the dunes. And it's surreal. It was really surreal. I never seen a place like this in the world, and it was a very unique place. So I stayed there for the day, and I hiked, and it's very risky, and it's very easy to get lost. So there are a lot of poles all over the sand dunes, because you have to know where you're going, because otherwise you can get lost. And like in the desert, you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. So these poles helps you to find your direction. And from White Sands National Park, I went back to Las Cruces, and then on to a place with one of the funniest names I've ever heard for a place. It's called Truth or Consequences. I think only in America a little town can be named this way. And basically the story of this name is because at one point, I don't know how many decades ago, some people from the village, from this old town, participated at a TV program, a TV quiz show, and the quiz show was called Truth or Consequences. So since the people there from this little village got very famous, when they went back, the mayor decides to change the name of the old town from whatever it was called to Truth or Consequences, and it's also known as T or C. just
T
initial,
or
T or C,
C.
like a T for truth and C for consequences. So instead of saying the long name, you just say T or C. And in T or C, there are natural springs. The town is on the it's on the Rio Grande River, and the Rio Grande is actually quite narrow at that point. You can cross it very easily. I open a parenthesis. Basically, the Rio Grande is where a lot of migrants die trying to reach the States from New Mexico. So when I was there, although it was further north from the Mexican border, I couldn't help thinking of these people, to be honest. The place was beautiful, and basically you pay an entrance to visit the springs, and then there are very small little pools, about 4 or 5 of them, beautifully made. You have a beautiful vegetation around you, and the water is nice and hot, and you're just by the river. So it was another magical place where I stayed. I spent the night there, and the day after I hit the road again to go north. So still in New Mexico, and I decided to take a less visited, a less driven road, which is Highway 52. And this road goes through, it's unpaved for about 50 kilometers, and it went through a territory which was Geronimo's territory during the Apache times. So there were a lot of flags and a lot of information about the very hard life of Apache, especially when they got rounded up and sent to Florida during a long march. And I arrived. I did this drive, which was beautiful, and I arrived to another very special place, which is called a very large array of telescopes. So basically, you get to a point, it's still like a very desert territory, with an immense area with about, I think it was like 27 giant telescopes. And these are radio telescopes, and it was just one of this kind in the United States. And this is where they filmed the movie Contacts with Jodie Foster. If you remember the scene where she's sitting down with a laptop under a very giant telescope, that's where I was. So it was very interesting being there, and it was just me and a bunch of students. I love places where I arrive and there are no tourists. And then from there I continued because the night...
We're going to continue in the next chapter of the video, okay? Thank you.